Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today as we work, it's too early for me apparently, as we talk about the creative arts economy. Joining us today is the Washington State Arts Commission. Did I say that correctly? I feel like maybe I did. I just know you guys as ARTSWA, so I Googled it really quick to try to remember it. My name is Alice Brown. I do wear a couple hats. Today I am with the Economic Alliance of Okanagan County. Before we get started, we like to take just a moment to also recognize that as an organization, we do live and work on the lands of the Colville Confederated Tribes. So just wanted to put that out there really quick. We will be spending the next 2 hours learning from Arts Washington. Feel free, if you have a question, to raise your hand or put it in the chat, and they'll do their best to get with you. Or before we end the call, we'll make sure that all those get answered for you. As I mentioned, we will be putting this online, so you'll be able to find it on the YouTube channel, as well as the Okanagan County Economic Alliance social media. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Miss Annette. Thank you, guys.
Great, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. My name is Annette Roth. I'm the Community Development Manager at the Washington State Arts Commission. So Alice, you did get it right, otherwise known as ARTSWA. And joining me are a few of my colleagues who I'm gonna have introduce themselves here in just a second. We have a long PowerPoint for you, but we wanna be able to foster a conversation with everybody. So, you know, as Alice mentioned, if you have questions while we're in the middle of it, feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat, and we'll try to answer questions as we come along. I'd like to actually do something, if this is okay. So since we have kind of a small group, I think it would be great if we could just do a quick round of introductions. We'll start with ourselves and then have all of you introduce yourselves, just so that we know who's in the room and sort of what your connection is to the creative sector or the creative economy. So again, I'm Annette. I'm gonna turn it over to Tamar, who's on our team. So Tamar.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. My name is Tamar Krames. I use she, her pronouns, and my role at ARTSWA is the Arts in Education Program Manager. And I'll talk about what that means later on. But I am a parent and an artist, and I'm passionate about this work and so honored to be here with a fabulous team. I'll pass it to Miguel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Miguel Gillen. I am the Grants to Organizations Program Manager. And like Tamar said, we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the PowerPoint. I use he, him pronouns, also an artist, and look forward to sharing our work with you. I'll pass it over to Bryan.
Good morning, everybody. Bryan Bales. I'm the program manager for Wellness Arts in the Military program here at ARTSWA, a relatively new program that you guys are going to hear about. Also a Marine Corps veteran, and I dabble in the arts a little bit as well. So happy to be here. I don't think there's anybody left at ARTSWA for me to pass it to, so.
No, Alice, if we want to, can we just start a round of folks, or I could just call people off, however you want to do it. It's fine with me. Oh, I think you're muted.
He said, absolutely, it is handed over to you. Do it however you'd like.
Okay, I'm just going to call people as I see you on my screen. So first we have Lindsay.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Bryson. I work for TwistWorks over here in Twist, Washington. I'm the events manager as well as the retail operations manager. And then I'm also part of Confluence Gallery. I'm the vice chair there.
Excellent, thanks. Next I see Margaret. Oh, Margaret, you're still muted.
Sorry, new to Zoom. I'm Margaret, and Margaret Kingston. I work for MedHow Arts Alliance. So I'm the art education director for the past 6 months. You may remember Ashley Lodato. She was previously in this role. So I'm happy to be here and learn from you guys. And I see a lot of MedHow faces. Hey, everyone. And I'm also an artist. a trained art educator myself. I've taught K-8 curriculum. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Law. I work at TwistWorks, and I'm the Economic Program Director and do a lot of our business support work.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. And Sierra.
I am sharing an office with Patrick, so I had a little bit of echo there. But my name is Sierra. I'm the Associate Director at TwistWorks. I use she, her pronouns. I moonlight as a poet. I suppose that's my connection to the art world. And I also am going to need to step out at about 9:50, just as an early heads up. I have another meeting to get to, so I apologize for that. But I'm excited to hear what is going on for the time that I can be here.
Great, awesome. Thank you all so much. It's helpful to know who's in the room for us. That way we just understand where everyone's coming from. Like I mentioned before, we have a PowerPoint for you. I'm going to run the PowerPoint for everybody because it's easier technology-wise for us to have 1 versus 4. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started. We're going to start with a brief overview of our agency, and then I'm going to talk about our Creative Districts program. Then we're going to go over to Miguel, who's going to talk about grants to organizations. Then Tamar is going to talk about arts and education, and then Bryan will talk about wellness arts in the military. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you all will be able to see this momentarily. All right, if someone can just give me a thumbs up to make sure that you all are seeing this. Okay, awesome, fantastic. All right, great. So thank you all for being here. We're going to just give you a brief overview about our agency and the work that we do. ARTSWA, the Washington State Arts Commission, is a standalone state agency. We are not under the auspices of any other organization or other agency. And we were founded in 1961. So our agency is 62 years old now this year. And the mission of the Arts Commission is to be a catalyst for the arts. We believe that it's really important to make sure that we can have arts and culture in everybody's lives throughout Washington State. And we want to make sure that the arts are celebrated throughout Washington and woven into the fabric of all of the communities across the state. So really quickly, we have a board of 23 commissioners that are appointed by the governor. 4 of the commissioners are elected officials. They are members of the legislature, 2 from the House and 2 from the Senate. And we have 1 representative from each party, so 1 Republican and 1 Democrat from both houses on our board. The rest of the folks on the board are various people who are in arts administrators, artists themselves across the state of Washington. We have representation from pretty much every region of the state. We currently have 32 employees. So for those of you that have worked with us in the past, you may have known us as a much smaller organization, and we have grown pretty significantly over the past probably 4 or 5 years. And really since COVID started, the services that we've been able to provide have increased significantly, which we're really excited about. And funds from our agency come from several sources. We get legislative appropriations from both the operating and capital budgets. We receive federal funds through the National Endowment for the Arts. Sometimes we have programs that receive grants, and also we have private sources of funds. So for some of our programs, they may have, private organizations that help to support some of the work that they do. And so we serve Washington State in a number of ways. I'm going to just give you a brief overview of some of the programs that we have. Obviously, as a state agency, we have administration, operations, finance, and communications. Those are sort of the underpinning of all the work that we do at our agency. They keep us running, as it were, and keep people aware of the work that we're doing. And we have basically 5 signature programs currently at the Arts Commission, and we're going to talk about 4 of them today. So we have Arts and Education, Art in Public Places, our Creative Districts program, grants to organizations, and wellness arts and the military. Since we don't have someone from AIPP, Art in Public Places, I'm going to just do a brief overview of that program. So it is the second oldest public art program in the United States. I think it was founded in the mid-70s. And what the program does is it purchases and cares for artworks in state buildings, colleges and universities, and schools, K through 12 schools across the state. Our collection has more than 5,000 artworks in it in over 1,300 buildings and campuses across the state. And so when the state constructs a new public building, such as an elementary school, 0.5% of construction funds go to fund art for that particular place. So our team at AIPP works with the local committees to choose an artist from our artist roster to design a site-specific work. And works are on paper. We have drawings, paintings, sculptures. You can see the picture right here. This is, it's a metal piece that was sited on an actual building. We have all kinds of art activities and work that exist across the state. I'm guessing that there are probably state artworks in your community. They're in pretty much every community across the state of Washington. So we have a number of additional programs and services that we offer as well, but I'll just briefly talk about. So we have the Washington State Poet Laureate Program, and we hold this partnership with Humanities Washington. So every 2 years, a new state poet laureate is appointed by the governor, and we work with Humanities Washington to co-manage the program. The current poet laureate is Rena Priest, and she is a member of the Lummi tribe, and she's the first indigenous poet here in Washington. Her tenure is actually going to end on May 1st, when we will have a new poet laureate appointed. And so we will be announcing who that person is very shortly, probably within the next few weeks. And we'll be having a ceremony called the Passing of the Laurels to transfer sort of that program from Rena to the new poet laureate. Another program that we offer is the Center for Washington Cultural Traditions. It's also jointly managed by Humanities Washington. And so this program, CWCT is the acronym for it, surveys, studies, and supports folk and traditional arts and other cultural traditions. So it works to ensure that people have increased access to Washington's rich cultural heritage. So within the CWCT are two kind of main programs. One of them is the Heritage Arts Apprentice Program, which helps master artists pass down their skills to apprentices. It's a year-long program, and we provide funding for this for the artist pairs so they can do their work. The CWCT also has a cultural traditions survey, which is a project that studies local cultural traditions across the state. And so again, it's to help develop programs that can support the traditions and culture within local communities. We have the Change Leader Institute, which is a professional development program designed for artists and administrators. So it teaches people how to support and affect change in their communities. And we host several cohorts of 12 members each year, and we provide them intensive hand-on learning sessions. Prospective attendees have to apply for the program to be considered, and we make sure that the groups that are the cohorts that are put together are selected to ensure equity, organizational equity, and geographic diversity. Another thing that we do are the Governor's Arts and Heritage Awards, which is an annual event, an awards ceremony that recognizes outstanding individuals and organizations that have significant impact and contribution to arts, culture, and the heritage of communities across the state. The award ceremony will take place in November. I think the date is November 15th. And we are going to be opening nominations for potential awardees towards the end of April or the beginning of May. So be on the lookout for that. In addition to these other programs that we have some requested funding for a couple of additional programs, and they're going through sort of the legislative process right now. The House and the Senate are both working on their budgets, and so we will know here in a few weeks if some of the things that we've been working on have been funded. One of them that's really exciting that we're very hopeful about is a tribal cultural affairs program. And so this would allow us to have a program that is dedicated specifically to tribal cultural affairs. So arts and culture activities supporting the tribes in Washington state. If we are successful in this funding, which looks like we may be, we will have the first program of its kind in the state or in the country, which we're really excited about. So when we have a few other things on the way as well. So I want to talk a little bit about, equity. So our agency takes equity very seriously. It is one of our core values. And, for us, equity means ensuring that everyone has access to arts and cultural programs, especially people in communities who haven't really had these opportunities to access them in the past due to historic inequities, geography, or economic factors. We make sure that folks in communities across the state are involved in the process of creation of programs that we work on. We want to hear their feedback and make sure that we can keep that connection to them. And we focus on this because we know that arts and culture is essential to people's lives and experiences, and that the creative sector, which includes arts and culture and so much more, is a huge driver of the economy. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate in that. And so, all of our programs across the agency serve all the communities in Washington state, but we're going to talk about 4 specific programs today that work directly with organizations and communities to help grow the creative economy and to provide opportunities for jobs and access to arts and culture. So before we do that, I just want to set the stage and talk a little bit about Washington's creative economy and what that is. So we have a pretty broad definition of what creative jobs are. It includes what would be considered traditional arts and culture activities, visual or performing arts, for example, but it also includes things like makers, restaurateurs, craft brewers, architects, and much more. Now, this infographic here talks a little bit about the state creative sector in 2021. That's the year that we have the most recent information for. And so you can see it's pretty significant. It's a pretty significant driver of the economy, almost 350,000 jobs. Average earnings across the state are around almost $57,000 per year. Believe it or not, there was a pretty significant increase in job earnings from 2020 to 2021. And even though the arts and culture sector was devastated by COVID, we still saw a little bit of job growth overall in this sector. A lot of the jobs in the sector are in more high tech, so like software development, web development, graphic design, and that sort of thing. But we also see representation, with more traditional sort of arts and culture jobs like photographers, musicians, and fine artists. And so, when we break it down and look at the creative sector in rural Washington, we wanted to take a look at what that looks like, because it is a little bit different than the overall creative sector in that, obviously, we're looking at these 29 counties here in Washington that have a population of less than 200,000. And so the total population is about 1.4 million folks. There are roughly 29,000 jobs in this region in 2021. And, compared to the number that we just saw, it seems like a big disparity, but really 30% of the jobs in the state are in software and digital design, and most of them are sort of in the Seattle metro area. But software jobs only make up about 5% of jobs in rural counties. And the biggest occupations in the rural counties are photographers. We do see some software development, writers and authors, and musicians and singers. So, it seems like, what we've learned from some of the data is that the creative sector jobs that exist in more rural communities are more experience-based. So things like restaurants, artists and performers, food manufacturers, antique shops, those kind of things. And so from our thinking, there's a really great opportunity for folks to think about, okay, what does our actual creative sector look like and how are we able to foster it? Maybe it's not going to look like what it is in the Puget Sound, and that's okay, right? People come here to experience arts and culture in a different way than they do in other parts of the state. And, as you start thinking about how you're going to grow sort of the creative sector overall in your community, take a look at what does that mean for you and how do you really want to do that in a way that makes sense with the things that currently exist within your community. So we're going to start by talking about the Creative District Program. I'm going to pause here just to monitor chat really quickly to see if anyone has questions. It doesn't really look like it too much. So, oh, I see Sarah does have a question. So go ahead, raise your hand.
Yeah, I was just curious if you know the average annual salary of the creative workers in the rural, if you take out the kind of Puget Sound region and just focus on the rural.
So it depends on the region that you're looking at. Some of the regions are relatively high, some of them are relatively low. So, so for example, it's sort of the north central region that you guys are in, it's pretty close to the average. It's right, right in that mid 50s range, maybe even a little bit higher than that. But then if you look at sort of Northeast Washington, which would be Ponderay, Stevens County, it's more like in the high 40s. So, and then some of the other regions, kind of are up or down. I mean, realistically, Puget Sound, particularly King County, has the highest, average income, which just is across the board in every sector for the most part. And it's pretty significantly higher than it is in other communities. Like, say, for example, the average is around 80,000 in King County for creative sector jobs, and the rest of the state is, right around that $55,000, $60,000 range. And again, that's because of the high-tech influence of those jobs.
Certainly.
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so so this Creative Districts program was created to encourage communities to use arts and culture to grow jobs, to increase economic and cultural opportunities in their communities, and also to help create a sense of place. We going to go to the next slide here. We want to talk about what is a creative district. Now, a lot of you are in TWISP, and there is a creative district in TWISP, so this may be information that you already know about. But for those of you that wonder how did it become a creative district, right? What happened? A creative district is a right-sized geographic area for a community. Every community, every creative district is different in Washington state. They're all differently sized. And we want to make sure that the district that exists within a community fits that community, right? We look at this primarily as an economic development tool for communities to help grow jobs in the creative sector. It's very much a focal point for arts and culture. So when people come to a community, they can go to a creative district or the area that's designated as a creative district and get a feel for what that community is all about. The communities use their creative district designation to promote their unique assets. So every community has something in it that doesn't exist anywhere else. And the whole point is to figure out what that is and to help share that with the world. And, like I mentioned, we have a pretty broad definition of what creative sector is. And so when people look at their creative districts, look at planning them and growing them, we want them to think broadly. It's not just about arts and culture or, galleries or fine art, as important as those things are, but there are all kinds of other aspects of the creative sector that exist. And some of them are very site specific or unique to a community. For example, in some of our Northeast Washington communities, we see there's more of a focus on like survival arts, right? So preserving food and making clothing and, carding wool and those kinds of things, which are definitely part of the creative sector. So we want people to think about what that looks like in their communities. The creative district designation is a state certification. And so its biggest benefit is because of that, because it is kind of a stamp of approval in a way of the arts and culture activities that exist in a community. It provides opportunities for additional partnerships with other organizations and for getting grants of larger nature. A lot of times, if a community is looking at a large philanthropic grant, such as an Our Town grant from the NEA, for example, there's a lot of work and planning that needs to go into the application. And much of that work for those types of applications is done when you're doing your creative district planning, right? Because you have to talk about who you are and what your community is all about. What's your, what's your market position, all of these kinds of things. And so you can take that information and apply that to these other kinds of grants, which is really great. So again, we focus on growing entrepreneurship through this particular program. That's really important. You know, artists are oftentimes business owners, whether or not they realize it, and we want to make sure that there's an ecosystem for them to thrive. Many of our communities have seen opportunities for redevelopment of underutilized businesses or buildings, for example, or conversion of buildings to new things. So an empty building into a makerspace, for example, or to an arts and culture facility. And through all of this process, communities are able to strengthen their future. We know that all the communities across the state are changing. Some of them are growing, some of them are not growing. And we want to make sure that as communities move into the future, that they're doing it in a way that is in line with their community values and that makes sense for what the community is and what the people in the community want to see. So it is a planning, application, and certification process, like I mentioned. It is very customized to each community in that every community is different. We have a pretty standard set of criteria that the communities need to meet, but it's not judged against other communities' criteria. So for example, TWISP, TWISP's creative district looks very different than Olympia's. And they're not really comparable because they're completely different places. They have completely different things in them, different activities. But we created an ecosystem for both communities to thrive using this designation. And we work pretty closely with the communities to do that. I travel all across the state, meeting with folks, helping to do strategic planning support, presentations, all of that kind of stuff, and other kinds of processes to make sure that what they're doing is in line with the community and fits that community. The whole point is to make sure that the creative district is authentic, that it reflects the diversity of the community as it actually is, and that people, no matter who they are within that community, are able to find a place within the creative district. This map right here is a map of the creative districts as of December 2022. It's color coded, so the red dots are the currently certified districts. We have 13 of them. We have one dot that's in orange, that's Vancouver, which is in the pre-certification stage. So Vancouver has submitted their application for certification, and we are hosting an application panel for them shortly. And if it's ratified or if it's accepted, then it will be ratified by our board in May, and then they would be a creative district at that point. The blue dots are communities that we're working with currently that are pretty far along through the process. Actually, Bremerton is just about in the pre-certification stage as well. And so we anticipate they would also be a creative district within the next few months. But as you can see, we have communities all across the state that are interested in and actively working on creative district certification. I've recently had folks from Leavenworth contact me about becoming a creative district, and I was in Ilwaco over the weekend talking to folks there. So we're seeing additional initiatives bubbling up in new communities as well. Each one of these communities is different and unique and really cool. And to me, seeing a map like this that covers pretty much every corner of the state with this program just demonstrates the value that arts and culture and creativity has in people's lives. And we want to try to foster that as much as we can. So we do provide a lot of support, as I mentioned. We have an equitable application process. It's very transparent. Everything's on our website. We want people to understand what they're getting themselves into before they start, because we think that is just a good practice. We have a lot of networking opportunities for creative districts, including an annual convening, which we're hosting for the first time in person since before COVID. This year, it's going to be at the end of June in Port Townsend. And we also have a rural cohort that we convene every other month where we bring all of our rural creative districts together for specialized training and learning, because we know that they need a different kind of support and technical assistance than communities like Issaquah or Edmonds do. So we offer a couple of grants for the creative districts. We have a $10,000 startup grant. So that's for the districts, the administrators upon certification, they can get $10,000 to help launch their program. And then we also have capital project grants that are in the amount will be $50,000 next fiscal biennium to do small scale capital projects within the community. So for example, in TWISP, there were a number of signs that were made that were posted around town. They were made by local artists. And you know, this one right here, this picture right here is of some signs that were made in Chihuahua. They also did a bunch of murals. We've seen mural projects, art markers, you know, signage like this, other kinds of, you know, community festival areas, those kinds of things are the types of projects that people have. We also have a partnership with WSDOT to provide highway signage for the creative districts. It's a requirement that each of the creative districts is supposed to get those installed. So WSDOT underwrites 75% of the cost of fabrication and installation of the signs, and the districts cover the other 25%. Most of our communities are either in the process of getting them done or have already, and we're really, really excited about that. So making a successful district includes having obviously a clearly defined arts and culture identity, but in reality, having broad community support and strong organizational partnerships are the things that make creative districts thrive. The community isn't involved or engaged, if there's a lot of infighting or organizations aren't playing well together as they go through this process or even after the process, the creative districts tend to be, they don't work very well. And so we want this to be very much a community-led development process. We want to make sure that those organizational partnerships are strong because this is, you know, this is affecting long-term change, and we want to make sure that everybody's on board. Cities or municipalities or tribal governments are required to be part of the process. They don't have to necessarily hold the designation, but they do need to approve of or cooperate with the creative district for obvious reasons. If we're installing built environment projects, the city needs to know about it. In TWISP, for example, the city is the primary administrator with support from the Metau Arts Alliance. You know, and then we also want to see a solid plan and long-term vision for activities and growth of the district. That's also key to making sure that things are going to be successful long-term. Now, so I put the slide up here because, you know, I wasn't sure who was going to be here, and if there were new communities who were looking at what do we have to do to become a creative district, these would be some of the things that they'd want to start thinking about, bringing their stakeholders together and finding partners to do this work. Working on defining their community values and figuring out what the community assets are, and also looking at community goals and needs. But I know that, you know, TWISP is already a creative district, and so some of these things have already taken place there. But, you know, these are things that evolve over time, and every district has the opportunity to recertify after 5 years. So Edmonds was our first district, and they're going to be doing that later this year. And so they're also kind of going through another 5-year strategic plan process right now, looking at these things. What are our values? Are they still in line with what we thought they were 5 years ago? Do we have new assets that we have to take a look at? Do we have new goals and new needs? What are those? And how is this district going to foster that? So that is the Creative Districts program in a nutshell. I'm going to just wait for a moment to see if there are any questions that pop up. And if not, I will pass it along to Miguel. Okay, Sierra, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, Margaret or Lindsay, maybe, or Annette, maybe you know, but what year is TWISP in the, like if we need to recertify every 5 years, how many years in are we on our first certification?
You're about halfway. So TWISP was certified in 2020. So sort of right in the middle of the first COVID year. So yeah, not quite 3 years in. So the 2025 would, I believe, be the certification year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm seeing no other questions. I'm going to go ahead and forward it to Miguel. So Miguel, let me know when you're ready.
I am ready. All
You're
right.
gonna have to let
Again,
me know when you want me to move the slides forward, Miguel.
oh, okay. Uh, Again, I'm Miguel. I'm the Grants to Organizations Program Manager here at ARTSWA. I've been here about 6 years now, so in advance. And I'm one of the reasons that this PowerPoint is a bit long because I was supposed to go in and edit it and I did not. So sorry. This is a PowerPoint that the whole staff uses in Grants to Organization. Our primary focus in the grants that we offer are cultural equity. Expanding the creative economy is really central. In terms of expanding the creative economy, I've been myself as an arts administrator been focused on this since my previous job at Artists Trust, making sure initially that artists got paid well and that they were recognized, and we've carried that over. Really, back then it was early discussions about that. It was sort of a new thing, ensuring that artists were compensated for their work well, and that organizations, small groups were creating good pathways to be compensated by developing good business practices and things like that. Carried that over to the Arts Commission, where we are focused on making sure, again, that when organizations are funded through us, that we see in their budgets that artists are being paid, that arts administrators are being paid, that there's not very much only when necessary volunteer work contributing to the presence of events in organizations, in arts organizations, that people are being paid properly. And then supporting arts participation. That's one of our primary focuses. That's the reason that the Arts Commission was created. So we of course support that, just ensuring that the programmings and events that we see are supporting a broad range of folks, creating access for folks to participate in the arts. In our typical year, we offer project support and general operating support grants. Sometimes we name them different things, but that's the general structure of the grants. We're NEA funded, and can you advance, Annette? Thank you. Project support grants and general operating support grants. And then we also offer art service organization support grants. We will talk about those individually as we move ahead in the PowerPoint. Other projects that Grants to Organizations program is involved with is Artists Up. Artists Up is an initiative that was started about 12 years ago. We just celebrated our official 10-year in existence, but 12 years ago was when myself and Heather Dwyer at For Culture and Irene Gomez at the Office of Arts and Culture created Artists Up. Artists Up is an initiative, and this was a while ago, that had a focus on making sure that artists of color were paid and appreciated. And we created a lot of focus groups and just general discussions with individual communities to understand how it was that the arts funding world could help them advance be contributing partners, contributing members of the creative economy. Washington Poet Laureate. This is a program that Annette mentioned at the beginning. It has in the past landed in grants to organizations. This is probably the last year that it's we're moving programs around at the agency. But right now the Poet Laureate program still is in the grants to organizations program. Community of care, we'll talk about these all individually as we go through the PowerPoint. Community care is another focus that we have. Community of care has the goal of moving the equity component that you normally see in applications where you have the check boxes and people check those boxes that they're serving particular communities, but we never really have any way of following up on that, ensuring that these communities are being served. So Community of Care is a new initiative to pull that funding and that whole activity out of applications. Folks will still indicate in applications that they're serving those communities, but this gives us a better way of funding The people that are actually doing the work that are really focused on it and need more support, we're starting with creative aging, but community of care as we move into other communities, folks with disabilities, and just various other communities that we normally see as that checkbox sort of thing, equity thing in applications. We're going to start building that, and it's going to become a community of practice so that organizations and individuals that are focused on really serving those communities directly can interact, and there'll be funding and things like that for that community. And then we mentioned some contracts here for the purposes of having you understand how it is that we at the grants to organization, besides having our primary funding programs, also work to Department of Commerce, for instance, was our direct, was how we helped during the pandemic. And, our goal was to ensure that, as the Department of Commerce reached out to the arts community, that they had, our goal as their partner was to provide any experience and information and formats that we had to ensure that the arts community was, reached appropriately. And the City of Olympia is a contract that we're working on now. That is based on cultural access funds, that statewide statute that allows communities to tax their local community to produce funds for creative activities and funding organizations. One of the reasons we're working with Olympia right now is to understand how that process works within communities, so that as this expands, cultural access funds programs expand across the state, we have some experience and can help folks more, through experience as opposed to just using, basic knowledge. We actually have gotten in there to see how these programs work within organizations, primarily around, or within communities, primarily around the equity component. As Annette mentioned, that is a central focus of everything we do at ARTSWA is equity. And we look at it from as many angles as we can. And one of them is understanding how these programs work within communities to make sure that when we're advising communities, we know from experience what's going on in the Grants to Organizations program. If you could advance to the next slide. Sorry, I'm in California, so there's a little bit of a delay. And this is a slide that I probably should have taken out. It's got my picture on it. It's kind of weird, but that's me. I'm the program manager. And again, the reason, this is all the staff in Grants to Organizations uses this. Recent highlights, as I mentioned before, we worked with the Department of Commerce, working to stabilize the sector after COVID-19. That was a huge focus for us, and it has been, of course, for everybody because of what it is. But as a department, we put a lot of energy into focusing on stabilizing the sector during, after, and the minute it hit, we hit the road running to help organizations, and that's been a real primary focus for us. And those were primarily with the Department of Commerce. And then I mentioned the City of Olympia based on cultural access funds. And we were a small team at that point. We were 2 people, myself and Linnea, but we have grown. And it's been very helpful for us to provide more services for folks and understand how things work out there. We can spend more time, for instance, on these contracted works. I'm working with Britt Matson below me in this slide to manage those contracts and manage the Poet Laureate program. And Linnea now has a staff person of her own. Ashley is working with her as an administrative assistant. Currently, Linnea has taken on pretty much all of the NEA granting, and myself and Britt are focused on contract work. If you could advance. And currently, most of our programs just closed. We had an enormous response to our grants. Every year it seems to get more and more. We're hoping that we get more funding, but that is a small problem with us at the Arts Commission, is that we have built very accessible programs that we're pretty proud of. However, we don't always have the funding to meet the amount of applications that come in. So that's a current issue for us. So our grants are generally small. So for that reason, we've decided to go with 2-year grants for operating support, which is different for us. We normally did 1-year grants. I think you guys have been funded by us before, but we are moving into the 2-year grant arena. And right now, we just closed Creative Project Support Grant program, and that was for small and mid-sized groups. The ask was $2,000 to $8,000. We just closed Sustaining Support, also for mid-sized and small groups, and the ask was $12,000 for a 2-year period, so $6,000 a year. We just closed Emerging. We didn't get a lot of response to Emerging, so we may pull that out and focus on that differently. But the emerging organizational support grant is really important to us. One of the things that we're focused on in grants to organizations is understanding how it is that we can grow organizations in arts organizations in rural communities and rural parts of the state. We've tried various ways of doing that. One of the focuses for trying to develop those emerging organization programs is to ensure that communities of color, immigrant communities, have the ability to start their own organizations outside of the support, that sort of collaboration that always exists with more white-led organizations that doesn't really always serve communities of color well. So we're looking for ways to create the opportunities, to grow opportunities for communities of color to grow their own organizations. It has a multiple prongs to that. One of them is to ensure that creatives of color don't need to be centered in cities, that they can move freely across the state and grow organizations, feel comfortable in rural communities, and then grow equity in the communities through the expansion and visibility of culture that doesn't really exist. So underrepresented cultures and underrepresented art forms are more accessible to communities of color in rural areas is one of our real main goals for that. General operating support is just about to open. This is for large groups, and this is your standard operating support, 2-year support for large organizations, institutions, and such. We are about to open that soon, as well as art service organization support, another place where we put an emphasis on equity, a strong emphasis on equity. Art service organizations are those that serve, that have professional development programs for arts professionals. One of the primary focuses of that is to ensure that diverse communities, diverse arts administrators have the ability to be trained and access programming, professional development programming in organizations that provide them. To become an art service organization statewide, an organization would be serving 10 counties, providing professional development growth in 10 counties. A regional art service organization provides professional development services in their county and 2 adjacent counties. And if you could advance. And just a little overview of Creative Project Grant. The Creative Project Grant, the way that NEA funding is structured is you really have to fund an organization that has arts culture in their mission statement. However, there's a lot of organizations out there that don't, but still provide arts participation opportunities in their communities. So this is one way that we can do this, and through a creative project grant, we can fund an organization that doesn't necessarily have that in their mission statement, but is creating an opportunity for participation by making the budget self-contained. In other words, we're not putting money directly into their operating budget, we're containing the budget and consequently have a better audit trail of how it is that we are spending those federal dollars that are assigned to arts and culture. Normally it's the mission statement is one of the guiding things that we use to determine that. And I think I'm being moved along here. Creative Project Grant, open to the public. They happen, again, this is a program that just closed. Our funding year is July 1st through June 30th, and must have arts and creativity as a main component, take place in Washington. And we can advance. And general operating support, again, 2-year funding, supports arts organizations in their work, providing creative and communal is really important to us. We're really working into moving into the arena of understanding our grant programs and how they affect community in a much broader and more focused way. Cultural experience for Washington State, and again, the general guidelines there. And then what's different is we do look for 3 years of programming for an arts organization that's going to get 2 years of sustaining support. If we could advance. And emerging, again, one of the places that we are really focused on. For emerging, the difference here would be that they have a different annual operating budget, of course, from $0 to $50,000. And we look differently at their experience between 1 through 3 years of programming history. And we look at the broad sense of what it is that those folks that are wanting to start new organizations, what it is that, how we define programming. We look for different elements and not necessarily always in the arts, but do they have the capacity to do what they say that they want to do. So if we could advance. And art service organization support, as I mentioned, one of the primary reasons that we really are involved with art service organization support is to ensure that there's access for arts professionals in the field to get the training that they need to serve their communities. And those grants run between $8,000 and $25,000 a year. If we could advance. And just an overview of the way that we work in grants to organizations. We recently closed up, are in the process of closing a contract that we did in conjunction with the Washington Festivals and Events Association of Washington. And again, it was to provide pandemic relief. It was a way that we went in to understand the festivals and events community. And now we have a lot more experience. And again, we were able to help a lot of communities through the pandemic with this relief. If we could advance. And the Work in Washington Round 5, you probably maybe all heard about that. That was really a Department of Commerce program, but our role was to come in and ensure that that this sort of collaboration between us created a smooth as much as possible and seamless application process, review process, et cetera, for the arts community. It was one of the first times that the Department of Commerce actually was working with our community as well as the nonprofit community. So there was a lot to learn. There was a lot for us to share with each other to ensure that this program rolled out as smoothly as possible. And if you could advance. And then we just closed up COVID safety for large organizations. This was as most of the pandemic relief programs that we did funded smaller to mid-sized organizations. There was a huge hole for large organizations that worked during the pandemic, spent a lot of money and did not get compensated because the amount or get relief for that, because the majority of funding went to small and medium-sized organizations. So we did this program very quickly and got our large organizations that really worked through the pandemic to keep Arts Live compensated for the amount of extra money they had to spend during the pandemic. And if you could advance. And ARTSWA, I don't think there's much more to say about ARTSWA other than it was a collaboration and still in process. And right now what we're focusing on is mentoring programs. And the reason is that from all the work that we did, and just the capacity of the organizations to run ARTSWA, what became very apparent is that artists of color want to be mentored by artists of color, by people of color. And so we're facilitating that process through the mentoring program at ARTSWA. And if you could advance. And then Poet Laureate, again, our main, it has landed in grants organizations. It's going to probably move over to Annette's program soon. But, we have that same focus of ensuring, that poetry is compensated well and accepted and acknowledged as, the art form that really, is good for all of us, that it's acknowledged and compensated well. And forward. And community of care, I think I covered that pretty well, so I won't go too much further into that. And we can go ahead and advance. Inspire Olympia, that's the Cultural Access Funds program in Olympia. Fascinating to work with the community of Olympia on getting this program up and running. It's set to launch soon, and our contract will be ending with them soon, but it was really a great learning experience for working with communities. And if you could advance. And that's it, just some images from around the state, and that's all I got for you today.
Great, so Tamar, whenever you're ready, we can go ahead and turn it over to you. I'm ready. Hi, everyone. I recognize some of your names, although I haven't met you in person. I am Tamar, and I manage the Arts and Education program. And the AIE program expands arts education engagement through grants, professional development, youth leadership opportunities, and ongoing research. And really our focus is on expanding equitable access to arts learning opportunities for pre-K through 12 youth. As you can see here, we work really closely with the Department of Education, or OSPI, who has one single in their whole entire giant fortress of people. I think there's at least 400 people there. There's one art person, just one. I work with her daily to just try to increase engagement and support for arts learning for youth. Some other things we do is we try to foster collaboration within the arts education landscape, and that's because we know that youth don't always have access to all the arts, media arts, theater, dance, visual arts, interdisciplinary connections. Like, they don't always get those opportunities within the school day, so we rely on building bridges with community organizations, artists, community members. We also expand learning opportunities for educators, both arts educators and also like science educators or early learning educators that want to integrate the arts into their work. We also try to get people involved, quite honestly, in policy around arts education because it matters. Like, the arts exists for youth because people fight for it, as you know. So we just try to get people involved, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. We work really hard to ensure that arts learning is not only accessible, but is culturally relevant and to both teachers and to youth. And then we just have to have research, because we need to know where arts learning is happening, where it's not happening, and how to address those gaps. So we're constantly trying to get a sense of that over time. Some specific programs within arts and education. Again, we have grants. We have a program called TAT Lab, or Teaching Artist Training Lab, which I'll talk about more in a minute. We have an early learning program called Creative Start, a poetry program for high school youth called Poetry Out Loud. We have a new Arts for All coalition that any of you can get involved in, which is that civic engagement with arts education, policy and practice in Washington State. And we have a new youth arts leadership program that you all coming up in May can nominate youth for this program, which is a cool paid opportunity for youth ages 16 through 19. Generally, we have two grant categories. One of them is open right now, but our two categories are our Arts and Education Project Grant, which is open to schools, K-12, pre-K through 12 schools, and also community organizations who want to implement an arts and education project. And I see, you know, Margaret, I'm sure you're involved in your arts and residency program, is a grantee of this project. So you probably know about this already. This grant just closed and is under panel review. And then a newer project we have, and it's open right now, is a grant supporting arts integration in early learning classrooms. And also these programs eligibility includes schools, early learning classrooms, and nonprofits serving youth preschool through third grade in arts integration methods. So that's open now. It closes in April, end of April. Another way you can jump in is, and I can put some links or follow up with an email, but we have a new statewide coalition working for equitable access to arts learning. We have folks from Spokane on this coalition, and also Tieton, folks from the North Central region, Southwest, Northwest Washington, and we all just try to advocate for increasing equitable access to arts learning and getting good data so that we know, like, there's no dance education in this whole entire region, or someone who lives here has to drive like 300 miles to have any theater opportunities, like just getting a better sense of who has access to what, where. And also, you know, we know that folks in the urban areas have more access to arts and cultural learning opportunities. So just getting a coalition together to come up with more pathways for rural youth, Native youth, etc., migrant youth. Another thing you can be aware of is folks can nominate or apply for a 7-month teacher training program called the Teaching Artist Training Lab, where artists who want to work with youth can engage in statewide community around instructional design. Like, how do I write a lesson plan? How do I write an assessment? How do I know that students are learning what I thought they were learning? How do I deal with classroom management? How do I make sure that I understand what culturally responsive teaching is and that my curriculum is relevant to the students that I'm teaching, etc. It's a really cool community, and organizations can sponsor folks to attend. Generally, people have a really positive experience and then feel empowered to work in many classroom settings with youth. It is youth focused though, focusing on giving teaching artists training to folks who want to work in K-12 schools, but also it gives folks some tools beyond that as well. I won't talk a lot about Poetry Out Loud, but just know we collaborate with schools at the classroom level and also educational service districts, or ESDs, to make sure that this program is accessible to, thanks Lindsay, to as many youth as possible. But it's a super empowering program for youth. Generally, people register in the summer, and then we just finished our statewide competition, and then there's a Washington state champion that goes off to Washington, DC, which we have someone right now who will be going there in May. As I mentioned before, we're in our 4th year of our Creative Start program, which was a legislative priority and still is, to make sure there's joyful, artful, creative learning happening in our early learning classrooms. And that's why we have funding through the state for Creative Start project grants. You can go to the next slide, Annette. We also have what we call a Creative Start Studio page that we can send links to. It's all found on our ARTSWA website, but there's tons of resources for early learning educators and caregivers to work with our youngest learners in arts and arts integration. Check out the resources. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to be involved in this project or learn more. We also collaborate with Wolf Trap, which is a national organization focused on arts integration, particularly performing arts for really little ones like preschool, 1st grade, and making sure they have joyful, experiential learning that supports literacy development and social and emotional health and growth. So that's pretty exciting, and will involve residencies across the state. Reach out to me if you're interested. As I mentioned, we have a youth arts leadership program, and I just want to pause for a minute and celebrate. And Alice was a part of this process. We applied for a Career Connect Washington grant at ARTSWA and received it. We've received a grant of $115,000 to focus on creating career pathways in the arts for youth in the Okanagan County and surrounding areas. So specifically, folks on this call may want to be involved in building out that pathway. And if you're interested, do contact me. I'm also going to send out an email in the coming months once that contract is set and we know what we're working with to gauge interest, but it will be in your area, and it focuses specifically that grant on building, again, career pathways for youth in rural and native communities in Okanagan and surrounding counties, including the Colville tribes, Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. So that's super exciting. And what I love about this grant is we don't have to implement anything. We just have to build something, and we have time to do it well and get a lot of youth and educator input and community input to do that. It's connected to your work in economic development. Those of you who are here with that hat on, and it's connected to obviously arts education. We're super excited about it. And we have the opportunity to kind of build a model that could then be scaled out to other regions. I just wanted to say our website, like if you look at this page, you'll see you can find all the programs on that top menu. And our website might change, but for now, if you go and click on Arts and Education, you'll see the menu lists all the programs I mentioned, like Poetry Out Loud, Teaching Artists Training Lab, Arts and Education grants. So just explore, and if you want to get more involved, again, email me and we'll get on the phone and talk it through. That is it for me.
All right, I think I am up next. So Bryan Bales again, we're Wellness Arts in the Military. I don't have fancy pictures like everybody else had. Anybody who's ever been in the military, this is an homage to Marine Corps death by PowerPoints that I'm doing for you all today. Not because I ran out of time to put pictures in it, but it's because I wanted to do that. So we'll call it that. So go ahead and hit the next slide, please. So I wanted to give everybody just kind of a little bit of a background about the program. It started in 2017 through small grants with the NEA and Creative Forces, and 50,000 here, 30,000 there, kind of a thing. And what they've done prior to me getting here was build up a cohort of organizations probably about 15 to 20 of them kind of in the South Sound area on the I-5 corridor. But in 2022, the state fully funded, they gave us $1.5 million to fully fund this program and really build it out and make it statewide. And so I was hired in July of 2022 after spending 5 years as a full-time employee with the State Department of Veteran Affairs and 5 years prior to that as a contractor for them as well. So I've been in the veteran world for a long time, and this is, the arts world is pretty new to me, but it's pretty great. And our goal with WHAM is for all veteran connected folks, be it active duty, guard, reserve, veteran family member, to be able to get enjoyment out of the arts. And in December of 2022, we hired on our program specialist, Dania, and she's awesome. She's standing next to me, not with holding up fist up like this, saying I better say something nice about her. But no, she's great. Has been a tremendous help. And what we've done with this program, and what I can say, I can honestly tell you all that there is no other program like this in the country. We are literally it. So we are trailblazing everything that we do here with WHAM. Is really going to be like, what's the word? A national. Basically, we're setting the example. We're leading the way, right? For military connected folks in the arts. So go ahead and hit the next slide. So with that, we've developed a couple of different grants so far for the program, and we're still looking at it. I know that's a giant word nightmare, so don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. This is our first grant that we did, and honestly, it's my favorite one. So this is our self-directed art practice grant program that we came up with, and really what it is it's a up to $5,000 grant for individual military connected folks who are in the state of Washington who want to pursue an art project. And you should have seen the applications that we got for this. It was pretty fantastic. So I'm talking painters, writers, wood turners, woodworkers, filmmakers, blacksmith, knife workers, what do we got? Pottery folks. I know I'm leaving some out, but the applications that we got were vast and they were incredible. Dancers. So of the 85 applications that we had, we recommended 71 for funding all across the state of Washington. And that was something that's really important to me as we build this program statewide, is to truly represent it, have it be represented statewide, right? Because it's easy to stay on the I-5 corridor of things. It's harder to go out to the entire state and build those relationships and build those connections and make sure that all folks know about these grants and are able to apply for them. And I think for our first go around for this pilot year that we're doing this grant, that was super important. And so we have just a great mix of not just active duty folks. We have a great mix of veterans, veteran spouses, veteran children who are over 18 who have applied and accepted these grants. So over $300,000 in funding is going straight to military connected folks, which there are other military organizations, military art organizations in the country that do grants. None of them give funding directly to the service member, right? And so that's just another way that we're leading the way. So we kind of get to cut out a lot of the stuff and give it straight to the individual, which is something that's really important to me. So go ahead and hit the next one. All right, so here's our general operating support grant. So this one is, we looked at our cohort of organizations, and we wanted to find ways that we could support these organizations in in connecting with military folks and doing doing their art programming, right? And so this grant, it goes up to $75,000 to organizations. It was open. We just closed it last month, and we're in the process of getting contracts out to everybody. Same with the SAP grant as well. So this is up to $75,000. We had 16 applications submitted for review, and 14 of them were recommended for funding for $644,000. So this is going to be a great way for these organizations who already have some really good veteran programming and military programming to be able to expand, to be able to hire more teaching artists, to be able to do more projects, connect with more folks all the way across the state. And again, we have a really good statewide representation of this. So we've got organizations who are in Eastern Washington as well doing this, as well as over here on this side of the state. Again, with the hope of this being our pilot year for other organizations to be able to expand, right? To be able to expand these organizations to include a more across the state, right? Let's go ahead and hit the next one, please. And here's another one. We did a partnership with the Washington State Department of Veteran Affairs for their veteran homes. So if those of you who aren't aware, the WDVA, one of their biggest, probably their biggest programming that they have here in the state is they run 4 veteran nursing facilities here across the state. So there's one in Ording, Washington, Port Townsend, Walla Walla, and Spokane. And then they also have a transitional housing program, which is for homeless veterans to be able to get back on their feet and help them find housing. And so that they have that located on their Ording campus, as well as the campus in Port Townsend. So for this one, we gave them $250,000 total. So that's $50,000 per home, and then $50,000 for the transitional housing program to be able to do art programming to promote wellness and life betterment for those senior veterans and their families. And I am really excited to kind of see what they end up doing with this. This was something that I'm passionate about, and being able to give back to the older generation of folks and do that creative aging to give them life better, to better their lives, right? And some information on our grants is that we were kind of in a push this year, right? So everything that we've done has to be spent by the end of June, end of the fiscal year. And so Miguel has been, and his team have been crucial in helping us really find our way and build these programs and build the applications and everything like that out. And next year, the next fiscal year, we're going to be doing at least the SAP grant and the general operating support grant again. So those are mainstays. As long as I'm here, they're not going anywhere, as long as we have funding. And then so kind of what we're going to do the rest of the year, right, is we felt like our SAP grant is such a unique grant. It's such a unique thing that nobody else is doing. So we wanted to find a great way to capture that. And one of the things that we're doing for that is I'm in the process of bringing on a veteran filmmaker to interview a few of the grant recipients and create a short documentary on the grant, on the projects that they're doing. And that's going to be a really, really neat thing that I can't wait for folks to see. And so that'll be filming in the next few months with the hope of us getting it by the fall this year, a completed project. And then building out the cohort, the WAM cohort for the future. So really expanding it to be a statewide reach, starting with our group of folks who were awarded grants. And then I'm bringing in a veteran consultant to kind of lead the way for us to do some mission, vision, and goal building and everything like that, to really be trailblazers in this field of veteran arts and what we're doing. So that is what I have. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
All right, well, thanks, everybody. Here's all of our contact information. We'll make sure to get the PowerPoint over to Alice, and that way you can have it and you have direct links for our email addresses and our telephone numbers. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen right now, and we'll see if people have questions or comments.
I have a question. Can somebody share a little more on survival art? I know you touched base on it, and I was trying to take notes, but can somebody kind of explain that one again to me?
Oh, that was me. So, so one of the things that we've seen, and I'll just speak to, so in Ione is one of the communities that we're working with who's looking at creative district designation. And the creative sector in their community looks very different than it does in other places. If you don't know about Ione, it's a town of 425 people. It's like 25 miles south of the Canadian border in the northeast quadrant of the state, close to Idaho. And, so it's a tight-knit community, but it's very rural. And so a lot of the things that people do are more craft oriented, right? So people are into food preservation and making their own clothing and those kinds of things, because they don't necessarily have access to go to a grocery store. Like, I have a Costco a mile from my house, right? That doesn't exist there. And so one of the things that they were looking at was, okay, so we don't have arts and culture in the traditional sense in our community, but we have what are artisans and creators and makers that do this kind of stuff. And so they are looking at how do they foster a creative economy around those types of activities, as opposed to traditional arts like fine art or painting or sculpture or anything like that. And for us, especially as it relates to the creative district program, that's exactly what we want to be able to see in communities, because we want what exists in the community to be authentic and real and reflective of that community. And there are people who would participate in that and care about those kinds of things. And so we want to help them foster that. I think it's really interesting. And I like the fact that they were looking at this from who are we and what do we have here that is meaningful, and we can not only grow our local economy and our local creative economy, but also help to foster sustainability and resiliency within the community. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So hopefully that's what you were referring to, Alice, and that answers your question. Okay.
Apparently I must be the only one. Oh, no, never mind. There are other questions.
Sure. The next question looks like it's for you, maybe, Tamar.
Yes. Man, 5878 for those on the call, Margaret, that came from you, right? So just to give a little background for folks who are not in arts and education, we're lucky. We're ahead of many states in that Washington has part of Washington law is that the arts are considered part of basic education, meaning when by law, public schools are required to offer math, science, ELA, arts, right? There's a list and arts are in there. Great, wonderful. Not all states have that. But what does that mean, right? Because we know that the arts, not every school has an arts certified arts teacher. Some schools have a lot of arts, some schools have no arts. There are whole districts that have like one person teaching art, and it might be like a digital photography class and they're on computers, right? So defining what that means is a challenge in terms of legislation. Senate Bill 5878, which passed last year, seeks to clarify Washington state law, and apologies if you already know this, but I'm just going to go through it, by requiring by law that every school offer a visual arts learning pathway and a performing arts learning pathway, K through 12. And before that, we had some legislation about high school, like for high school graduation requirements, you're required to offer 1 to 2 years of art. And so that has led to the hiring of explicit art teachers and course coding of explicit arts courses. We're not quite there yet with middle and elementary school, but this is the first step, is to have a clarifying law. What's challenging is funding. So this legislation of 5878 did not come with additional funding for districts to hire arts teachers. So some people are calling that an unfunded mandate. Other people are just saying like districts, because school districts are local control, they have the power to interpret all of those laws into their staffing and hiring, whether that's math, PE, arts, like the arts are in a standalone in that. Anyway, it's super complicated. And it is extra devastating and difficult because, as far as I know, every single school district is facing budget cuts post-COVID, like basically American Rescue Plan funds like flooded the schools in good ways that led to like mental health providers and free lunches and more transportation options and all kinds of things. And in some cases, arts teachers. And now, districts going into next fiscal year are shrinking back, and a lot of the things on the table are things like mental health providers, nurses, arts. I mean, we all know the story, right? So that is in conflict with Senate Bill 5878, saying that every school building is going to have access to performing and visual arts. That was a mouthful, but what I suggest for anyone who is interested is that they join, and I'll put it in a link to the chat. And Alice, is it okay if we just do a follow-up and I can put lots of links to anything we've mentioned? But the Arts for All Coalition is the place where we encourage civic engagement with arts education policy, and where we get together and we break it apart, and we have folks from OSPI, we have folks who can help us understand from the district level how these laws are being interpreted. And there's also an organization called Arts Ed Washington, which does a lot of the advocacy pieces, like what do you do if you want to talk to the school board? What do you say? Who do you bring with you? So there's like that level of more grassroots engagement with arts education policy. And then there's a bunch of us who are just trying to understand, like, how do other states do it? Like, do we want to say number of minutes? Do we want to push legislation towards certification? All kinds of stuff. So that was a lot. But it's complicated, and a lot of laws that we are required to follow are not super clear, right, in the implementation phase, especially in the school system, because it's local control. Okay, stop. That's a lot. Did that help, Margaret? Kinda. I mean, I think the ideal is that it leads to more hiring of more arts teachers at the elementary and middle school level. Is that going to happen? I'm not seeing it right now, but.
Yeah, I think I could use like a quick conversation with you about what's going on in our local level. So, because I'm about to go into a meeting and you have all that knowledge, so super helpful. Thank you.
Just reach out to me. We'll chat.
Okay, thanks.
I will say in the education field, in the arts and education field, what I am seeing is they're really interested right now in youth leadership and they're really funders of all kinds, and they're really interested in career, like technical and career pathways to like prosperity and for youth feeling agency in all kinds of fields, including the arts. So that's where I see the opportunity is to sort of build some programs out so it can be more concrete for folks when they think about kind of what Annette was saying, when they think about the creative industry, like what does that actually mean? And it means different things in different communities. So we have an opportunity to define like, what does it mean in your community? How is that visible to youth? Is that on the radar of arts educators, right? Or if they're teaching about like, you know, Picasso or whatever, like with no connection whatsoever to their community and the pathways within their community, like we have an opportunity to address that disconnect. Like there are artists in your community, like making money, doing things. Anyway, please call me. Well, if you want to be involved in that in your area.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I think that brings up a sort of larger conversation that's already happening, you know, around what that notion of creative economy, creative sector is. As many of you may or may not know, there is a new creative sector lead position and sort of a focus area at the Department of Commerce on the creative sector in general. And right now they're working with a consultant, which was actually West Ave, and folks across the state to kind of get a better handle on understanding what the creative sector looks like here in Washington, which we have some data about, obviously, but then also how do you define that and how do you measure that going forward using specific definitions that are Washington's based. And, you know, it just brings up larger conversations around how does it intersect with arts organizations that are doing work on the ground? How do we make sure that there are pathways for students to get into those kinds of things? You know, making sure that veterans and all people really get to be part of that. You know, and it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like because, you know, especially when we have a bunch of new partners involved in looking at this kind of work, they all have different goals and different, like, measure things in different ways. And so to me, that's going to be interesting to see how we're able to work with them. And are we ensuring that, say, you know, we talked about survival arts, for example, maybe that's not traditionally part of the creative sector or they're not necessarily high paying jobs like software development is, but it's also extremely necessary, you know, to the health and stability of a community to have folks that can provide those kinds of services. So how do we ensure that it's a both and, right, in every community, that there are opportunities for those, you know, high value, high wage jobs, and also the things that help support a community through long term, you know, for the long term. I'd love to hear any of my colleagues who have thoughts about that or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's been amazing working with Annette and the Creative Districts program and sort of folding and reconfiguring our programs to work within communities. You know, the whole linking of business and government and individual artists and small groups and arts organizations in a community to reach one goal, which is the Creative District certification, has been really, you know, we learn something in grants to organizations all the time about the way communities interact with each other and the way how the arts play very specific roles in communities, very specific social structures, and you know, how you have to really pay attention to that. And I love what's going on in that sustainability, that sort of survival a landscape, because we're going to learn so much about how it is that we can take that community's experience, that community's relationship to arts and culture, and you know, it just builds our vocabulary across the board about how it is that we relate to creative programming. And you know, it's for us as administrators, for me as an administrator, it's like fascinating. You know, it's something that I really enjoy. We're constantly looking for ways to better integrate the arts. You know, we talk about health and wellness in the arts, which is what Arts and Military does. You know, we're touching on that. It's a new program. We're going to learn so much from that. But we talk about these things sort of as, I don't know, these headliners of what we're going to do in a lot of ways, but actually getting in there and learning what that is amazing. And it's all an effort to make sure the agency moves in this trajectory of finally getting to that place where arts and culture, one of the foundations was understanding how it works within the creative economy. That's important. Money is important. Who's defined as who is contributing to that $10 billion contribution to the state is important. Really isolating those things sort of through statistics. But when you get in there to a community like the one that Annette just mentioned, you learn so much more. Our understanding of the arts becomes so much richer. And so I really appreciate Annette's work in that area.
Thanks, Miguel. That was very nice of you to say that. One of the things that we have also been seeing happening in just a larger arena is the notion of how do arts and culture fit within disaster mitigation and disaster planning and that kind of thing, right? And so that's something that our agency is beginning to look at in a couple of different arenas. And I know at FEMA, for example, that's something that they are wanting to see is that arts and culture folks are more integrated into that disaster mitigation process. And how can they help? How can they use arts and culture to help communities think about that kind of work, to think about sustainability, to think about how they can become more resilient when faced with disasters of all kinds, right? So it could be climate change, it could be another pandemic, it could be a localized power outage, whatever the case might be. And to me, I see that there's threads with all of these kinds of pieces that exist. And for us as an agency, we have been spending the past couple of years and more, really since I started at the agency 5 years ago, really trying to integrate all of these different pieces together. They all sound very different, but like all of us, the four of us and our other colleagues spend a lot of time talking to each other and working together. And how can we fold, how can we create projects to do that? Tamar, you want to talk about that, arts trauma-informed programming?
Yeah, just as you were talking about disaster relief, and it's connected to Miguel's talking about communities of care, but the role of artists and communities around healing, mental health in general, but also trauma-informed programming for any community members. But in my world, it's trauma-informed programming for youth to process things that have happened or things that are happening in their communities. And I know through COVID and also just social unrest and the difficulty, the polarization of the last many years, that the arts have played a huge role in youth-centered communities for communicating and expressing through a lot of cultural divides, for example, and a lot of confusion and insecurity for youth. So we are learning how to engage in those conversations around mental health, social health, and trauma-informed practices. And artists are really ready, and teaching artists are really ready and already do engage in that work.
Mm-hmm. And one of the trauma-informed initiative we have going now came from TWISP. Post fires and that seed of that idea, we turned it into a decision package, and we really want to make sure that we're addressing, as this is all climate change. It's unavoidable, but the trauma, the concept that came from TWISP about working with kids post fires, and how initially as summer was coming on, and it's normally a time, as we all remember, when it was exciting to get out there, kids were facing anxiety about what the summer might bring with regards to fires. And across the state, there's just natural disasters after natural disasters happening. And so there's an obligation for us as the Arts Commission to take that on, to, if we're truly talking about health and wellness, it's looking forward to helping people through trauma, the displacement, all that comes with being involved in a natural disaster. Figuring out a way to create programming around that is really another exciting thing that we're working on here to make sure communities stay strong. The economy is nothing without a strong community to do that work. So we're excited about that, and so excited that did come from your region, and you know what that could potentially bring for ours.
Alice, do you have any specific questions or thoughts or anything like that that you want to share?
I have lots of questions, but I think I will connect with you guys offline because I would probably take at least another hour of just flooding you guys with questions. But if there are no other questions, speak now. Patrick, Margaret, Gus. Well, then what I will say is Annette, Miguel, Bryan, Tamar, thank you for spending 2 hours with us today and just, you know, really informing us of what's going on at ARTSWA. I know I've took a lot away from this today, and so I appreciate the time. For those of you, we will again post this on the Economic Alliance's YouTube as well as their social media. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with everybody. And it sounds like ARTSWA will be sending some information that I will make sure gets passed on to everybody as well. So with that, I'll say everyone have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.